In April 1943, a fisherman off the south coast of Spain found a body in the water. He was wearing a British military uniform. He had a life jacket on, and chained to his wrist was a briefcase. Inside that briefcase were letters between senior British commanders discussing where the Allies were about to invade southern Europe. Every single word of it was false. The man was real. The uniform was real. The rank, the identity papers, the letters from his fiancée, the ticket stubs in his pocket, the overdraft notice from his bank. All of it had been assembled over several months by two men working in a basement in London. And it worked so completely that the German High Command moved divisions, minefields, and an entire defensive posture to the wrong island. This is the story of how you build a person who never existed, and the part of it that almost nobody talks about, which is the man they actually used. To understand why anyone would attempt something this strange, you have to understand the problem the Allies had in 1943. North Africa was won. The next step was obvious. Cross the Mediterranean and get into southern Europe. The problem was that it was too obvious. Because if you look at a map of the Mediterranean, there is one island sitting almost exactly in the middle, between North Africa and the European coast, with harbors and airfields and a position that controls everything around it. Sicily. There was no serious alternative. Anyone with a map could see it, and that was said out loud at the time by Winston Churchill in a line that survives in the planning documents. Everyone, he said, except a bloody fool, would know it was Sicily. So the Allies were in the position of attacking a place the enemy already expected them to attack, against defenses that could be prepared in advance, which meant the entire problem was not military. It was informational. They did not need to hide the invasion. They needed to make the Germans believe in a different one. Now, deception was not new. British intelligence had been running deceptions for years by this point, and there was an entire committee whose job was to feed false information to German intelligence in a controlled way. But this particular idea came out of a memo written years earlier by a naval intelligence officer, which listed a set of speculative tricks for misleading an enemy. One of them proposed planting a body carrying misleading documents where the enemy would find it. The man who wrote that memo would later become a rather famous novelist, and the list itself reads exactly like something a novelist would write. For years it sat there, unused, as an idea that was clever and completely impractical. Then, in 1943, two officers picked it up and asked a question nobody had bothered to ask before. Not, would this fool anyone? But what would actually have to be true for it to work? And this is where the operation becomes genuinely fascinating, because the answer was an enormous number of very small things. Start with the obvious one. If you plant documents on a body, the enemy has to believe that the body arrived there by accident, which means it has to look like an aircraft came down at sea and this man was aboard, which means the body has to be in a condition consistent with several days in the water, which means you cannot use just any body. You need one whose condition tells the right story. That alone stopped the idea for years, and it is the point at which most retellings move quickly on. I don't think we should, because the man they used was a real person with a real life that had nothing to do with any of this. He was a Welshman. He was in his 30s. He was, by every account, poor, unwell, and alone in London. He had no fixed address at the end. He died in early 1943. And because nobody came forward to claim him, and because a coroner was quietly persuaded to help, his body was taken and given a completely different identity. He was given a name, a rank, a service number, a father, a fiancé, a personality, and a reason to be flying over the Mediterranean. None of it was his. His real name was kept secret for over 50 years. It was only confirmed publicly in the 1990s, and even then it took an amateur researcher digging through records to establish it. He is now named on the grave in Spain where he was buried under the false identity, with an added line recording who he actually was. I think that matters, and I think it belongs in this story because the operation is often told as a brilliant caper, and the central prop in the caper was a man who was never asked. So how do you build a person? The two officers running this understood something that most people trying to deceive get wrong. They did not focus on making the fake documents convincing. They focused on making the man carrying them convincing. Because German intelligence would inevitably ask one specific question: is this real? And the way you answer that question is not with the letter itself, it's with everything around it. So they built a life. He was given a service identity card, which had to look worn, so it was carried in a wallet and rubbed against clothing until it aged. He was given a fiancé with a name and a photograph, which was a real photograph of a real woman who worked in the same building and who agreed to it. He was given 2 love letters from her, written by a colleague who was asked to imagine being in love with someone about to go overseas. He was given a letter from his father, formal and slightly cold, in the way that letters from father of that class and generation often were. He was given a bill from a jeweler for an engagement ring that he had bought recently and could not really afford. He was given a letter from his bank about an overdraft, which is one of the small strokes of genius in the whole thing, because nobody forges a bank complaint. It's too embarrassing and too specific to be an invention. He was given ticket stubs from a London theater, dated shortly before the flight, to show he had been in London right up until departure. He was given a used bus ticket, keys, a pencil stub, loose change, a book of stamps with some used. The rule they applied was simple, and it is the reason it worked. Everything in his pockets had to be the kind of thing a person accumulates without thinking about it, because a forged document is something someone made. An old bus ticket is something that just happens to a person. And then there was the problem of the documents themselves. You cannot send a formal set of invasion orders because a formal document would be sent by secure channels, not carried by hand by a single officer over the sea. So the false information was hidden inside a personal letter from one senior commander to another. Chatty, slightly indiscreet, complaining about staff, and in the middle of it, almost in passing, a reference to the target of the coming operation, mentioned as though both men obviously already knew it, and a joke about sardines, which does the work of pointing at Sardinia without ever quite saying it. That is very careful writing, because the reader is not being told a secret. The reader is being allowed to overhear it, and people believe what they think they discover themselves far more readily than what they are told. The whole package was placed in a sealed steel canister, packed with dry ice, which as it evaporated filled the container with carbon dioxide and slowed deterioration. The canister was labeled as optical instruments. It was taken aboard a submarine and carried to a point off the Spanish coast, which was chosen for a specific reason. Spain was officially neutral, but in practice, Spanish authorities in that region were known to share anything interesting they found with German intelligence. So the plan was not to give the documents to the Germans. It was to give them to Spain and let Spain give them to the Germans, which is a much better plan because material that arrives through a chain of accidents is far more convincing than material handed over directly. On the 30th of April 1943, the submarine surfaced before dawn. The canister was open. The body was placed in the water with a life jacket and the briefcase attached, and a small rubber dinghy was released nearby to complete the picture. The officers on deck said a short prayer. Then the submarine dived and the tide took him in. He was found that morning. And then the most nerve-wracking part of the entire operation began, which was waiting. Because from that moment on, the British could do nothing. The documents were in Spanish hands, and then, they hoped, in German hands, and then being read by people whose job was to be suspicious. British intelligence did have one advantage, which was that they were reading a great deal of German signals traffic and could therefore watch, at a distance, for signs of whether it had worked. They also did something clever and slightly ruthless. The British formally asked Spain to return the briefcase, politely at first, then more urgently, and made a visible fuss about it, which told anyone watching that the contents mattered enormously. If they had said nothing, that would have looked suspicious. The briefcase came back after a delay. An examination showed that although it had been made to look untouched, the letters had been opened, read, and resealed, which was exactly the result they wanted. Then came the confirmation. German intelligence assessed the documents and concluded they were genuine. The assessment went upward, and it reached the very top. Order followed. An armored division was moved. Minefields were laid off the wrong coast. Torpedo boats were relocated. Defensive attention shifted towards Sardinia and toward Greece, which had also been seeded in the same package.